The sea was still tonight. Not silent, not empty, just still, like a thought held gently between breaths. The currents moved so softly they were almost invisible. A slow motion beneath the dark waves that shimmered faintly in the moonlight above. From far below, the water looked like glass, painted with drifting light. Tiny bubbles rose lazily, twisting and turning as if the ocean itself were sighing in its sleep. They glowed faintly with silver as they passed through rays of moonlight that pierced the surface, each one breaking the darkness in a soft shimmer that danced across the seafloor. Down here, everything moved with patience. The coral fans swayed side to side, their edges curling like fingers brushing against invisible threads of current. Their colors were muted by the hour, deep violets, sea greens, and slow blues blending together, painted by the dim pulse of light that filtered through the ocean's ceiling. Somewhere in the distance, the faint hum of a whale echoed through the water low, slow and soothing, like the sea itself speaking a language of dreams. The sound traveled gently, bouncing off reefs and sandy valleys, his vibration rippling through the still world like a lullaby meant for no one and everyone at once. A school of jellyfish drifted through the quiet, each one glowing with a pale blue light, their soft bells pulsing in an almost perfect rhythm. They floated together as though they were sharing a thought, their tentacles trailing like threads of moonlight on a gentle tide. Each pulse made the water around them shimmer, as if the sea were breathing in time with their slow movement. Below them, the sand was smooth, untouched, except for a few small trails drawn by crabs on their nightly walks. One tiny crab paused beside a broken shell, its claws brushing it softly as though deciding whether to take it home. Then it slowly climbed inside, curling up and letting the current rock it to sleep. Its new shell caught a thin beam of light, and for a moment, it looked like a small pearl half buried in silver dust. The deeper one looked, the more the sea seemed alive with small, secret lights. Tiny specks of plankton blinked in and out like sleepy stars, their glow fading and returning in quiet harmony. Oh, if you watched long enough, it felt like you were watching the ocean breathe a slow rhythm, rise and fall, as if the entire sea had its own heartbeat. Seagrass waved gently, brushing over smooth stone. Each blade moved with slow confidence, like it had been doing the same dance for centuries without ever needing to hurry. A pair of sea snails climbed along a coral ledge, their paths almost crossing but never quite meeting. They left soft trails in the fine layer of sand dust that had gathered on the coral surface. Above them, a current swirled gently, carrying with it a faint song of distant chimes, the sound of tiny shells brushing together on the seafloor. The world felt ancient here, and yet alive, a living lullaby made of movement and stillness at once. No sound was harsh. No color was too bright. Everything blended, everything flowed. The moon above cast its reflection into the water, a trembling disk of white light that scattered and fractured as it met the waves. From below, it looked like 1,000 little moons, each one pulsing and disappearing in the rhythm of the sea. As the light touched the coral, it seemed to awaken faint glimmers within the reefs themselves. Some coral branches lit up with a ghostly glow, not bright, but enough to paint the sand beneath them in pale blue hues. The water was cool, clean, and heavy with calm. Every motion was slow, like time had loosened its grip and simply decided to float. Even the fish that wandered through the scene did so with a sleepy kind of grace. A small school of butterfly fish passed by, their fins flickering in the dim glow, their scales shimmering like threads of silver cloth. They turned and curved together, as if guided by some gentle rhythm that only the sea could hear. And far away, beyond the edge of the reef, and the ocean deepened into quiet shadows. The sound of the upper world faded there, leaving behind only the soft murmur of unseen currents. It was the kind of darkness that didn't feel empty. It felt full of dreams, full of whispers, full of old songs still echoing through the water. If one listened carefully enough, they might hear the ocean's voice, not in words but in feeling. A vibration, steady and kind, that touched every grain of sand. It was the voice that reminded every creature here that it was safe to rest, that the night was long, and that peace belonged to the sea tonight. Above, the waves rippled faintly against the surface, and a trail of moonlight spilled down like a silver ribbon. The light wandered, bending and swaying as it touched the tips of coral and the backs of sleeping fish. Everything beneath it seemed to glow softly in response, as if the whole ocean were breathing in time with the moon. The silver ribbon of moonlight stretched deeper now, folding itself into ripples and soft waves of light. Every movement made the glow shimmer differently, as though the sea were painting its own reflection again and again. The deeper it reached, the softer the glow became, until it was only a faint whisper of light across the sand. The quiet here felt endless, but never lonely. It was the kind of quiet that wrapped around you like a blanket, warm in its coolness, slow in its rhythm. Every sound blended into the next, the hush of drifting sand, the slow song of water pressing gently against coral, the echo of a distant current moving somewhere unseen. A small cloud of plankton glowed ahead, swirling lazily as though they too were caught in a dream. Their light pulsed faintly in rhythm with the water on and off, a slow heartbeat. Fish swam through them and emerged, dusted in light, as though carrying pieces of the moon on their scales. When the fish turned, the light scattered and fell like soft rain through the water, vanishing as it touched the seafloor. Beyond the coral ridge, a cluster of sea anemones swayed in perfect unison. Their long tendrils moved with the faintest pulse of the ocean's breath, each motion so delicate it could barely be seen, only felt. Tiny fish hid within their folds, peeking out for a moment before sinking back into the safety of their glowing shelter. The anemone's colors shifted slowly with the movement: rose, lavender, soft gold, all fading in and out like a slow ocean sunset, repeating itself in miniature. The sound of the current grew slightly stronger here, brushing over stones and shells with a faint, rhythmic murmur. The water's song deepened as it passed through narrow coral passages, its voice like the breath of something vast and timeless. It was not a song with a melody, only tone, resonance, and feeling. A lullaby made, not of words, but of motion and patience. A starfish clung to the side of a stone, its 5 arms stretching out like the points of a star in the night. Tiny specks of light drifted down and settled upon it, and for a moment it looked as if it had gathered the sky unto itself. Beside it, a sea cucumber rolled slowly, shifting the sand with a faint puff, its texture soft and cloud-like in the moon's dim reach. The coral towers stood high above, some shaped like spirals, others like great branches reaching upward to where the moon waited. Their shadows rippled softly across the sand, and in those shadows small lives moved quietly, crab shells, tiny worms weaving patterns no one would ever see again. The reef was asleep, but it never stopped breathing. Each tiny pulse of water, each shift of grain and shell was part of its dream. Somewhere above, a current brushed past the kelp forest. The long leaves of seaweed twisted and turned, their soft edges catching stray beams of light that made them look like ribbons drifting in a slow-motion dance. The kelp moved as if it had a rhythm. Only the sea could hear a rhythm slower than time, as if the ocean itself were swaying to its own heartbeat. Within that forest, small creatures stirred. A pair of glowing shrimp darted between leaves, their light flickering like twin fireflies in the water. They vanished, then reappeared a few feet away, their motion leaving faint trails of greenish light in their wake. A snail crawled across a smooth stone, its shell marked with swirls that mirrored the eddies around it. Even its path, slow and deliberate, seemed like part of the song the sea was humming tonight. And then for a moment, everything seemed to pause. The current slowed. The bubbles stopped rising. The water itself seemed to hold still. Even the plankton stopped glowing. It was as if the ocean had taken a deep breath and decided not to let it go. A moment of perfect, suspended calm. When the movement returned, it came like a sigh, soft, steady, endless. The sand shifted gently, tiny pebbles rolled, and the sound of distant waves returned like an old friend. The plankton began to glow again, and their light rippled outward, spreading through the water like the return of a quiet dream. In that hush, a sea turtle passed overhead. Its shell carried faint scratches, traces of long journeys through far waters. Its flippers moved with slow precision, each stroke perfectly measured. It glided through the moonlight, the glow washing over its shell like liquid silver. For a moment, its shadow fell across the reef, and every creature below seemed to rest even deeper. As the turtle disappeared into the darker waters, its path left a trail of tiny bubbles that shimmered behind it, rising toward the surface where the moon still waited. The bubbles broke apart and vanished, but their echo lingered not as sound but as feeling, like the ocean's memory of movement carried in the heart of stillness. The night was not ending. The sea was not sleeping. It was simply existing, slow, vast, full of breath and quiet. And in that rhythm, everything seemed at peace. Deeper still, the light faded into soft shades of blue and silver gray. The water here moved more slowly, heavy with quiet, and every sound seemed to stretch longer before melting into stillness again. Even the smallest movement sent gentle ripples through the sand, and the world around it shimmered faintly before returning to calm. The reef walls here rose like ancient cliffs, their surfaces carved by time. Soft corals covered them in patches, blooming faintly like underwater gardens. Tiny shrimp flickered in the cracks, and a single ray passed above, its body gliding like silk through the water. And when it flapped its wings, light rippled over its back, a slow rhythm that seemed to match the beat of the sea's sleeping heart. As the ray disappeared into the distance, the silence returned a deep, thoughtful quiet that filled every corner of the reef. The sand below looked untouched, smooth as velvet under the drifting light, and the small pebbles scattered across it glowed faintly with bioluminescence, as if the ocean had scattered its own stars across the floor. From somewhere beyond the ridge, a faint, low hum began to rise, not a song, not a voice, but a vibration that moved through the water like a gentle pulse. It grew slowly, wrapping itself around everything it touched. The coral trembled faintly, the anemones swayed, and even the light seemed to quiver softly. It was the sound of the deep ocean speaking, not in words, but in memory. An ancient sound that had always been there, waiting for the quiet to reveal it. The hum blended with the soft push of the current, and together they became something like music, long, low, and endless. It rolled through the valleys, echoed against the coral, and drifted upward toward the surface like a sigh too soft to hear. A small sea slug glided slowly across a rock, its translucent body glowing faintly pink. Behind it, a thin trail shimmered in the moonlight, curling and fading as the current touched it. Every few moments it paused, its soft body gently rising and falling, as though even it was breathing in rhythm with the ocean around it. Nearby, a group of glowing plankton gathered in a spiral motion. Their light grew brighter, forming a soft halo that illuminated the water. Within that halo, small fish appeared, their bodies reflecting the glow as they turned and swam through the circle. It looked like a tiny galaxy drifting beneath the sea, stars moving, colliding, and returning to stillness again. As the spiral widened, the light reached the coral towers, painting them in shades of blue and silver. The coral responded in kind, tiny polyps opening and closing in slow sequence, their movement almost invisible, but part of a larger rhythm, a dance that only the sea remembered. The hum deepened again, softer now, like the ocean's exhale. Bubbles drifted upward, names slowly spinning as they rose. Each one caught a fragment of light and carried it higher, a trail of tiny moons climbing through the dark water. When they reached the top, they disappeared soundlessly, leaving behind only the faint shimmer of their passing. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the sound of sand shifting echoed faintly. A hermit crab emerged, carrying its home on its back. Its shell was etched with faint lines, like waves carved into stone. It paused at the edge of a rock, its tiny eyes peering into the open water, and then it began its slow crawl forward, each movement deliberate and peaceful. The world around it seemed to watch. A curious shrimp peeked from behind coral, a small fish paused mid-swim, and even the anemones stilled for a moment. It was as if the entire sea had chosen to witness this simple motion, this small life moving through the grand silence of night. The crab found a hollow in the sand and stopped. It turned once, twice, then slowly lowered itself down, its claws tucked in close, its eyes half closed. And soon, it was still again, another tiny heartbeat settling into the ocean's dream. The moonlight reached farther now, casting soft streaks of brightness over the seafloor. Each ripple of water bent the light into new shapes, circles, ribbons, waves, a slow living pattern that never repeated itself. Sometimes it looked like fabric being drawn through fingers, other times like a soft wind blowing over a mirrored field. Above the reef, a single bubble rose higher than the rest, catching the full glow of the moon. It carried that light with it all the way to the surface, where it finally broke and became part of the stars again. The ripples it left behind spread outward, soft rings that moved gently across the still water before fading into nothing. And then there was only the quiet again, a long stretch of calm, where nothing stirred, and the only sound was the slow hum of the ocean's breath. It was here, in this deep, tender silence, that the sea felt most alive, in the spaces between motion, in the stillness that held every dream of the deep. The ocean deepened into its quietest hour. The light from above had softened into faint threads of silver, barely reaching the sand below. Even the smallest bubbles had slowed, turning lazily as they climbed through the still water. It felt as if the whole sea was holding its breath, content, unhurried, at peace. A gentle current slipped between the coral towers, brushing over the rocks and winding through the seagrass. Its movement was so delicate that it made no sound, but the anemones felt it. Their soft arms swayed as if stirred by an invisible hand. The motion passed like a whisper, and in its wake came a faint shimmer of light, as though the ocean had exhaled a sigh made of starlight. Far below, near a shallow trench, sand swirled softly into small spirals. Within one, a sea snail crept forward, its shell tracing a slow curve across the surface. Its path left a faint mark that would vanish the moment the next current arrived. But for now it lingered, a small story written into the sea. Above it, tiny shrimp flickered in and out of view, their bioluminescent sparks winking like tiny lanterns. They darted through the coral and disappeared into the folds of the reef, leaving trails of greenish light that faded like fading dreams. When the last one vanished, the water seemed darker, but not colder, only more still, as if even the darkness had grown tired and was ready to rest. A ray of moonlight struck the shell of a sleeping turtle. It rested at the base of a coral wall, its body still, its flippers half buried in sand. Faint lines across its shell caught the glow, and for a moment it looked like a map of stars, each curve and groove tracing paths unseen by any creature but the sea. The turtle's breathing was slow and steady, each exhale sending a tiny bubble toward the surface, each bubble carrying with it a piece of silence. The current touched the turtle's shell and moved on, weaving through the valley and across the reef's edge. There the coral changed shape. The hard branches gave way to soft fans, and those fans opened and closed as though sighing in their sleep. The current brushed them gently, and their edges glowed faint, catching the thin light like silk catching dawn. Beyond them, the open water waited, a vast expanse of darkness stretching in every direction. Here the sea was endless. No coral walls, no sand, only distance and breath. The light faded into blue, then gray, then nothing. And that nothing there was peace. The hum of the deep returned, soft, round, steady. It came from everywhere at once, and yet it felt close, as if the ocean itself was humming in contentment. The sound was warm and endless, rolling through the water like a slow heartbeat. It gathered around the rocks, around the shells, around the smallest drifting pieces of sand, a song too deep to be heard, but too real to be ignored. In the far distance, the faint call of a whale rose through the dark. Its tone was low, mournful, and impossibly long. It traveled for miles, echoing against the reef walls, changing shape as it passed. By the time it reached the quiet coral valley, it was soft, a vibration more than heard. It filled the sea with warmth, a lullaby shared by everything that floated, swam, or slept. The seagrass bent gently as the current passed. A few grains of sand lifted, swirled once in the light. Motion was small, but the calm it left behind was endless. Each ripple of light upon the sand moved slower. Each sound faded into the next. It was a rhythm, a breathing rhythm, steady and kind. Above, the surface shimmered faintly. The moon had begun to lower, and the first faint suggestion of dawn touched the horizon. The water caught it, turning from deep indigo to a lighter blue, as if the ocean were beginning to wake, but not yet, not fully. It lingered in that in-between moment, where night still held its quiet, and morning was just a soft promise waiting above. The creatures below stirred only slightly. The fish turned in their sleep. The coral swayed. The current drifted without hurry. It was as if the entire sea understood this pause, the moment before waking, the silence between two heartbeats. The moonlight thinned and blended into the soft glow of the coming day. The reefs reflected it gently, their colors muted and calm. Every shade of blue, green, and violet dissolved into one smooth hue, the color of rest. The ocean had reached its most peaceful hour. Nothing rushed, nothing fought. Everything simply was. And in that stillness, if one listened closely enough, they could almost hear the ocean breathing, slow, patient, eternal. A deep inhale drawn from the farthest corners of the sea, a long exhale that wrapped around every living thing below. The hum faded. The waves above softened. The light shifted just a little more. Somewhere in the distance, the faint shape of a familiar pineapple house began to glow, its windows catching the first hints of dawn. The sea around it shimmered gently, the current passing by like a mother's touch. And though the deep ocean continued to dream, somewhere nearer to the surface, one dreamer, small, square, and smiling, was about to begin his own quiet drift. The sea sighed once more, its final breath of night carrying the peace of the deep into the shallows. And as the last stars of the ocean's glow faded, the current slowed to stillness, a perfect calm, a perfect beginning. The first faint light of morning drifted through the quiet streets of Bikini Bottom, filtering softly through the water like liquid gold. It did not rush, nor pierce, nor blaze. It arrived slowly, a warm exhale after the deep blue of night, bending and shimmering as it touched coral rooftops and sleek seaweed fences. Down at the end of Conch Street, SpongeBob's pineapple home glowed faintly. The round windows, fogged by the cool water, shimmered with a tender light, and the small bubbles escaping from the chimney rose like sighs toward the brightening surface above. Inside, everything was still perfectly still except for one gentle rhythm, SpongeBob's breathing. The sound was soft and steady, a calm little melody that filled the space like a heartbeat. In his cozy bed, SpongeBob lay curled beneath a blanket shaped like a wave, his hands tucked under his cheek, his mouth slightly open, and a quiet smile settled across his face, the kind of smile that only appears in dreams. Beside him, the alarm clock rested silently. Its hands glowed in the dim light, pointing toward a time long before dawn would fully arrive. It would not ring today. The sea itself seemed to know that rest was sacred this morning. The room was filled with small sounds that made the quiet more beautiful. The soft hum of bubbles drifting through the water pipes, the faint creak of SpongeBob's bed shifting under his gentle breaths, and the low, slow purr of Gary, fast asleep at the foot of the bed. Gary's snores came in tiny spirals of sound, each one followed by a bubble that wobbled up to the ceiling before vanishing into silence. The curtains swayed faintly, their motion as soft as a jellyfish drifting through a tide. The light that touched them shimmered in hues of turquoise and gold, and when it reached SpongeBob's face, it painted his cheeks with faint ripples of color like he was dreaming in light. Outside, the ocean stirred gently. Tiny particles floated past the pineapple's windows, sand dust, plankton, the first curious bubbles of the waking reef. Somewhere in the distance, a sea star turned in its sleep, and a chorus of seahorses sang their soft morning tune, a low, rippling hum that rolled through the quiet streets. SpongeBob shifted in his bed, his blanket rising and falling with his breath. His dreams were slow and calm, the kind of dreams that come after long. In his mind, he was floating through a sea of jellyfish, each one glowing faintly pink and blue, their bells pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. He drifted among them, weightless and happy, the world around him soft and endless. The jellyfish moved as one, their light painting the water in waves of quiet color. SpongeBob reached out his hand, and one brushed against his palm, a small spark of warmth, a memory of every kind thing he'd ever done, every laugh, every song. The dream deepened. He floated past jellyfish fields, past the familiar coral towers that stood like gentle giants watching over him. He could hear the hum of the sea, the soft murmur of current and coral, the same lullaby that carried him to sleep. Somewhere beyond, the crusty crab stood quietly in the dark. Its sign swayed gently in the current, the faint glow of the letters shimmering just enough to be seen. The chairs were stacked, the grill was cold, and the tables waited patiently for another day. But in his dream, SpongeBob could still hear the faint sizzle of a patty, the soft scrape of the spatula, not as work, but as memory, a sound that brought comfort, like the rhythm of waves meeting shore. He smiled in his sleep. Gary stirred slightly, his shell reflecting a faint pulse of light from outside. The glow moved through the room like a heartbeat, a gentle rise and fall that made even the shadows look alive. Outside, the sea began to shimmer with faint color, the deep blues of night giving way to soft green and gold. The current that had been slow all night began to move again, drifting lazily through the coral streets, carrying with it the scent of salt and morning. It brushed over SpongeBob's pineapple, making the small leaves on top sway gently. And the sound of that movement, the ocean's soft breath, found its way through the window and into his dreams. In the dream, SpongeBob floated higher. He rose above the jellyfish, past the glowing coral, past the gentle fish, still asleep in the current. The world below was soft and quiet, a quilt of silver and blue stitched together by the moon's fading light. He turned once in the water, arms open, eyes closed, and felt the sea hold him not as water, but as warmth. The kind of warmth that makes everything feel whole. Every movement he made sent small bubbles drifting upward, each one catching a glimmer of dawn before it vanished. A sound followed, the gentle hum of a whale far in the distance, rising through the deep like a note meant only for dreamers. The sound wrapped around him, a soft vibration that filled his heart with calm. It wasn't calling him anywhere. It was simply saying, "Rest, you are safe." And in that moment, SpongeBob drifted deeper into his dream, so deep that even the sea grew still again. And all that remained was light, motionless, endless, and kind. In the dream, SpongeBob floated endlessly, weightless as a single grain of sand caught between the tides. The water around him shimmered faintly, not with sunlight, but with something softer, more forgiving, like the glow of old memories rising from the ocean floor. He saw his friends not as they were in waking life, but as faint lights in the water, gentle, glowing shapes that pulsed in rhythm with the current. Patrick drifted nearby, upside down as always, snoring bubbles into the soft blue dark. Each bubble rose lazily, bursting into quiet laughter as it vanished above them. SpongeBob giggled in his sleep, his body turning slightly beneath the blanket. The laughter from his dream rippled outward. And somewhere in the real world, Gary's antenna twitched at the sound, like even the snail could feel the warmth of it. In the dream, the current began to shift, slowly, almost imperceptibly, drawing SpongeBob forward through the quiet expanse. He floated past reefs of glowing coral, their light flickering like candle flames in the distance. Schools of tiny silver fish glided past him, their movements silent and smooth, each one catching a piece of light as it passed. So the sea itself seemed to breathe with him. There was no hurry here, no clock, no work waiting. Only the gentle rhythm of life existing without effort, a dance so slow it could almost be mistaken for stillness. He drifted past an arch of coral so large it felt like a cathedral doorway. Its surface shimmered with small starfish clinging quietly, their arms curling inward like petals closing in sleep. Beyond it lay a meadow of sand, its surface unbroken except for the soft trails of crabs who had passed through hours earlier. The current thickened, its hum deepening to a low tone that wrapped around him like a blanket. He recognized that sound. It was the same hum he sometimes heard when lying in bed after a long day, the faint vibration of the sea pressing gently against the glass of his window. Now, inside his dream, it filled him completely. He closed his eyes. The water grew darker, but not in a frightening way. It was warm darkness, the kind that invites rest, the kind that lets you sink without fear of falling. From the edge of the dark, a shape appeared, a jellyfish larger than the rest, its glow pale and golden. It pulsed once, then again, its tendrils waving softly through the still water. SpongeBob reached down, his hand trembling slightly as he touched it. Instead of a sting, he felt warmth, a hum that traveled up his arm, into his chest, and settled somewhere behind his heart. The jellyfish pulsed again, and the hum became clearer, a rhythm, slow and familiar, like the beating of his own heart beneath layers of sea and silence. The great jellyfish began to move. Not away, but upward. And SpongeBob followed without meaning to, his body rising as if the water itself was lifting him. He drifted beside it, watching its glow paint ripples of gold on his hands and cheeks. It was guiding him somewhere, though no words were spoken. The sea didn't need them. They passed through a cloud of plankton, each one sparkling like dust caught in sunlight. The water filled with faint color, soft greens, pinks, and blues, swirling together like a living painting. The sound of distant waves reached him again, rolling through the deep like the slow breath of the ocean itself. SpongeBob looked below. The seafloor was a vast quilt of color, coral gardens, sand valleys, ancient shells half buried in the soft sediment. He could see his house far away, a faint glow in the distance, the small shape of a pineapple resting in the calm. It looked peaceful, anchored against the quiet tide. He wanted to wave to it, to send a little good night from his dream, but the current turned him gently away, as if whispering, "Not yet." The jellyfish slowed its pace. Its glow dimmed slightly, and SpongeBob realized that it was leading him towards something brighter, a curtain of light stretching across the sea. Not sunlight, but something deeper, as if the water itself had remembered on and wanted to recreate it. As he approached, the sound of the sea grew softer, more delicate. He could hear every detail. The bubbles rising, the faint hum of coral breathing, the whisper of the tide brushing against faraway rocks. It all merged into one long, continuous lullaby, a song of rest that wrapped around him completely. He could feel himself drifting slower now, as though the water was thickening, holding him still in its embrace. The jellyfish pulsed one final time, its light flickering brighter, and then leaving behind only the glow that now lived in SpongeBob's chest. The water fell into perfect stillness. SpongeBob floated there, suspended between waking and dreaming, surrounded by nothing but calm and light. He did not move. He did not need to. The ocean would carry him where he needed to go. He smiled again, that small, sleepy smile, and the world around him pulsed once more, as if the sea itself was smiling back. The water around SpongeBob shimmered with quiet life. Every speck of plankton, every distant coral spark seemed to breathe in time with him, slow, steady, endlessly patient. It was as if the ocean itself had chosen to dream along with him. Somewhere in the distance, a current whispered through the kelp forests, sending gentle ripples through the endless blue. Each ripple carried faint echoes of voices, not words, but tones, memories of laughter caught in bubbles, the faint ringing of the Krusty Krab's bell, the soft murmur of Squidward's clarinet far, far away. They floated through his dream like notes of an underwater lullaby. He could see them shimmer in the distance, soft threads of sound twisting in the light, spinning through the water like ribbons of melody. He reached out and touched one. It sang, not with a voice, but with a vibration so pure it filled his chest. It was the sound of the ocean remembering something kind, the sound of days spent cooking, laughing, racing with Patrick through the jellyfish fields, and falling asleep to the hum of bubbles on quiet nights, just like this one. SpongeBob drifted closer, his movements effortless. The water supported him, lifting and lowering him in the same slow rhythm as breathing. The ribbons of sound gathered around him now, curling softly through the water. Each one glowed with a different hue. Coral pink for laughter, sea green for calm, and golden blue for the warmth of friendship. They weaved together in front of him, forming a shape, a door made not of wood or stone, but of pure light. It pulsed gently, as though waiting. He hesitated, his smile faint but certain. He felt no fear, only a quiet wonder. He drifted closer and passed through. On the other side, the ocean opened wide, a vast expanse of calm stretching farther than he could see. The light here was soft, filtered through layers of moving water that shimmered like silk. Every color seemed slower, deeper, as though time itself had chosen to rest. SpongeBob's reflection moved below him, a faint golden shape surrounded by infinite blue. He could see his own smile mirrored in the sand beneath, as if the ocean wanted him to see himself the way it saw him, gentle, kind, full of light. Above, long trails of bubbles drifted upward, spiraling slowly toward the surface. He followed them with his eyes, watching as they grew smaller and smaller, until they became nothing more than tiny flickers of silver. And yet, even as they vanished, he could feel their presence lingering in the water, echoes of a journey still continuing somewhere beyond sight. Then he felt the current shift again, subtle, familiar. The tide that brushed past his window every morning, the one that always arrived just before dawn. It circled him like an embrace, pulling him gently toward the direction of light. SpongeBob looked up. Far above, the color of the sea began to change. The deep indigo of night softened into turquoise, then to pale gold. The light was not harsh, and it moved through the water like music, each ray bending and dancing as it touched the sand below. He rose slowly toward it, no, not swimming, just letting himself drift. The water thickened around him, the glow becoming warmer, each pulse of light in rhythm with his heartbeat. He could hear the ocean's song still, low, steady, endless. A voice without words, a sound without source. As he drifted closer to the light, faint shapes began to form around him. Soft silhouettes of coral branches, the curve of a clamshell, the outline of a familiar window. He was nearing home. Even within his dream, the sea was guiding him back. A shadow floated nearby Patrick again, upside down, mumbling in his sleep. 5 more minutes, Patrick said dreamily, his voice bubbling through the water in slow, lazy tones. SpongeBob laughed softly, a sound so light it barely disturbed the silence. "Okay, buddy," he whispered into the dream. 5 more minutes. The sound of his voice rippled through the water, carrying warmth wherever it went. It brushed across coral, through seagrass, and even reached the tiny shell of Gary, who stirred gently on SpongeBob's bedside in the waking world. Outside the dream, the light in the room shifted, a faint, early glow spilling through the curtains. The sea beyond the pineapple house was turning brighter, the kind of bright that comes only once, the moment before dawn becomes morning. But SpongeBob remained within the dream. He floated just below the waking surface, now eyes half closed, his thoughts as slow and clear as drifting sand. He didn't want to leave yet. The ocean had more to say, and its words were soft enough to keep him suspended between sleep and awareness. A final hum echoed through the deep, the same tone he had heard before, low and infinite, like the heartbeat of the sea itself. It grew quieter, fading into the sound of his own breathing. The water grew lighter still, the light warmer. And as he drifted upward, SpongeBob smiled again, a smile that said he was at peace. Everything around SpongeBob shimmered not with brilliance, but with the kind of soft radiance that felt alive. It moved and breathed and whispered, folding around him like a lullaby woven from water and warmth. He floated there, weightless, his fingers trailing through the gentle current, leaving ribbons of light in their wake. The dream had no edges now, and no direction or end. It was all motion and music, the slow pulse of the tide, the heartbeat of the ocean. And within that sound, SpongeBob began to feel something new, a quiet rhythm, not from the sea, but from beyond it. A steady, soft ticking. It was faint at first, surfacing through. He listened closely. Tick, tock, tick. The sound was familiar, the rhythm of his alarm clock, still resting quietly beside his bed. It wasn't ringing, not yet. But its gentle beat had found a way into his dream, calling softly, not to wake him, but to remind him that morning was near. The dream began to shift. The colors changed, the blues fading into gold, the dark edges lifting like mist. He could feel the warmth of sunlight, though he was still deep beneath the sea. It wrapped around him like a blanket, soft and steady, and carried him higher. The ocean floor below grew distant, its coral gardens dissolving into faint outlines. The current guided him upward, slow and certain, like a tide returning to shore. Above, the light thickened, a curtain of warmth waiting for him. As he rose, small bubbles floated from his fingertips. They drifted upward and catching the light as they went, each one carrying a piece of his dream, a jellyfish glow, a laugh for Patrick. When the bubbles reached the surface, they shimmered once and vanished. SpongeBob smiled, his eyelids fluttering as though his body could feel the shift between dreaming and waking. The water around him brightened further, no longer the deep blue of sleep, but the soft yellow of early morning. In that light, he saw the outlines of his home again, the pineapple walls, the shelves filled with shells and trinkets, the curve of Gary's bowl glinting faintly. He could hear the sea beyond the glass, still moving, still singing its endless, patient song. The hum of the current matched the rhythm of his breath. Slow in, slow out. The sea and SpongeBob breathing together, two halves of one great stillness. A tiny ripple brushed his cheek. It was cool, tender, like the sea giving one last good night before morning arrived. He opened his dream eyes, and the world came into focus. The gentle swirl of light across his ceiling, the faint movement of bubbles near his window, and the soft outline of Gary at the end of his bed. For a moment, SpongeBob hovered between the two worlds. He could still feel the dream, the calm, the glow, the ocean's gentle hum, but the edges of reality were returning, each one clear and kind. A faint current brushed through the room, making the curtains ripple like water. It carried with it the scent of salt and morning, that unmistakable feeling of a new day beginning quietly. Gary yawned, a small bubble escaping his shell. He blinked his sleepy eyes and looked toward SpongeBob, who was still half asleep, his smile lingering from the dream. Outside, the sea had turned golden. The first rays of sunlight filtered down through the water, weaving through coral and kelp, painting Bikini Bottom in a soft morning haze. Everything looked peaceful, the way the world always looks in the quiet before anyone wakes. The crusty crab sign swayed in the current, the light bouncing gently off its edges. Squidward's house stood perfectly still, its windows glowing faintly from the reflection of dawn. And Patrick's rock let out a single, tiny snore, proof that he too was still dreaming somewhere close by. Inside the pineapple, SpongeBob stirred. He turned slightly in his bed, pulling the blanket closer to his chin. The glow from outside spread across his pillow, touching his face like a soft hand. He murmured something, maybe a word, maybe just a sigh, and settled again, his breath steady, his heart slow. The sea seemed to lean closer, listening. And for a few precious moments, everything held still. No movement. No sound but the faint rhythm of bubbles and the heartbeat of water. It was as if the ocean itself wanted him to have this, a little more rest, before the day began. The clock ticked once more, then once again. Its sound was almost musical, woven into the quiet hum of the sea. Outside, a jellyfish drifted past the window, the same soft golden glow from his dream. It pulsed once, as if to say, "Sweet dreams, SpongeBob," then floated away, disappearing into the morning light. The current slowed. The room stilled. And SpongeBob, wrapped in his warm blanket, smiled softly in his sleep. He would wake soon, but not yet. For now he drifted one last time through the quiet space between dream and day, held by the gentle rhythm of the sea that loved him, the sea that always waited, always sang, always whispered, "Rest now, you are home." The morning drifted through the water like a slow song. The first golden threads of sunlight reached across the sea, touching the coral forests and turning them into a living mosaic of color. The night's darkness folded away quietly, slipping into the deep trenches where it would rest until evening returned. Bikini Bottom lay peaceful beneath the shimmering light. The homes were still, their outlines softened by the haze of the waking sea. And far beyond the quiet streets, the coral fields began to stir. The coral awoke not with movement, but with sound, soft, ancient tones that rose from the reef like breath. Each branch, each bloom, each living fragment hummed faintly. It was not a song meant for word, but a harmony that existed long before voices ever did. The sea listened, and the coral sang. The sound began low, a vibration that shimmered through the sand. Tiny shells trembled where they lay, sending gentle ripples outward. Crabs paused in their burrows, their antennae twitching as the melody brushed past them. Even the seaweed swayed in rhythm, moving not by current, but by song. Above the reef, a cloud of plankton glimmered in the rising light, each one pulsing in time with the coral's hum. Together they created a slow, rhythmic shimmer, a heartbeat of the sea. This was the coral choir, the hidden voice of the ocean, the lullaby sung not for sleep, but for peace. Every morning it began the same way, a quiet gathering of tones deep beneath the surface, each coral adding its own subtle vibration to the whole. A large coral bloom at the center of the reef began to glow faintly. Its branches were wide and curled like open hands. Tiny fish darted through its arches, their scales catching the early light and scattering it in small flashes. The coral's song deepened, a low hum that carried across the seafloor. Nearby, smaller coral joined in, the staghorns, the fans, the brain corals, each producing a note so faint it could only be felt, not heard. But together, they filled the ocean with harmony. A sea turtle drifted past, its shell dappled with moving shadows. It slowed its pace, hovering in the still water as if to listen. The hum of the reef vibrated gently through its shell. It closed its eyes, and for a moment, it too seemed to become part of the song. Farther down, a school of butterfly fish began to move in slow circles around the coral. Their movements were deliberate, their fins waving like hands keeping time. Each turn they made sent a small wave through the coral branches, a pulse that answered the deep hum beneath. The sea responded with patience. No rush, no beginning, no end. Only motion, steady and soft. The coral choir grew stronger. The sand itself seemed to breathe with it, rising and falling in gentle ripples. Small bubbles escaped from the crevices, each one catching light as it drifted upward, a slow parade of shimmering spheres making their way toward the surface. A pair of starfish rested nearby, their bodies pressed close to the coral. They didn't move, but they too began to glow faintly. Tiny sparks of reflected color flicked their backs. Even in stillness, they were part of the rhythm. The hum spread wider, reaching the edges of the reef, then moving beyond. It passed over the sand plains, across the sleeping shells, and into the deeper water near jellyfish fields. There it met the low, wandering songs of the jellyfish, soft tones that pulsed in time with the coral below. The two melodies intertwined like seaweed in a current, becoming one. The whole ocean seemed to sigh. The current shifted gently, a slow swirl of warmth that brushed over everything in its path. The hum deepened once more, rolling like thunder in slow motion. But there was no storm, only calm. From above, a ray of light touched the tallest coral spire. The glow spread from branch to branch, a golden ripple that made the entire reef shimmer. Tiny shrimp darted in and out of the glowing cracks, their transparent bodies catching flashes of blue and gold. The water filled with movement, small, measured, perfectly timed. Every sound, every hum, every click, every sigh of moving sand became part of a single, unbroken note. The choral choir had reached its morning peak, its melody deep enough to settle the restless, soft enough to soothe even the smallest heart. And somewhere far above, as the choral sang, bubbles brushed past SpongeBob's window, their faint hum mingling with the rhythm of his dreams. The ocean was awake, but still gentle. The day was beginning, but the song remained slow. The sea never hurried. It only breathed. The choral's hum spread outward, carried by the soft, steady push of the current. It traveled through narrow canyons, over the pale ridges of sleeping clams, and into hidden groves where seagrass swayed in slow, hypnotic patterns. Everywhere it went, it gathered new sounds, the tiny click of a crab shifting a pebble, the sigh of bubbles slipping from the sand, the distant call of a whale rising from the deep. Each sound joined the choir without effort. There was no conductor here, no command. The ocean simply knew how to sing. A soft shadow passed across the reef, a manta ray gliding silently above the coral towers. Its wide body moved like a sheet of silk through the water, its wings spreading ripples that shimmered in the morning light. As it passed, the coral below seemed to brighten, its glow pulsing in rhythm with the ray's motion. The manta ray turned once, then circled lower, brushing the edge of the coral with the tip of its fin. The touch left a faint trail of light behind it, a golden swirl that hung in the water before dissolving back into color. A small chorus of sea snails began to hum along the reef wall. Their shells vibrated faintly, producing delicate bell-like tones that filled the quiet spaces between the coral's deeper song. Each note was tiny, almost fragile, but together they formed a shimmering harmony, a lace of sound fine as thread, woven gently into the larger song. From a nearby cave, the faint, slow pulse of a whale returned. It rolled through the water like thunder softened by distance, deep and patient, its echo reaching every corner of the reef. The coral responded, its hum bending slightly lower, matching the whale's tone with reverence. The two sounds merged into something vast and peaceful, a harmony that stretched across miles, uniting the smallest coral bloom with the largest creature in the sea. Above, sunlight pierced through the water in slanted beams. The rays danced across the coral tops, and wherever they touched, the colors deepened, pink into crimson, blue into indigo, gold into soft flame. The fish shimmered like living jewels in that light. They darted between coral arches, their scales catching and scattering color in all directions. Each movement sent a pulse through the water, a flicker of brightness that became another note in the song. Even the sand seemed alive with rhythm. Hermit crabs shuffled along the bottom, their tiny claws making soft tapping sounds that fell perfectly in time with the coral's hum. Every sound, big or small, found its place. The ocean accepted it all. Farther out, a sea anemone stretched its arms wide. Its tendrils waved slowly, their motion tracing spirals through the water. Small clownfish swam among them, their fins whispering faint patterns as they brushed the soft corals. The anemone's movement made a sound, too, so quiet it could only be felt, a low, even vibration, like the soft heartbeat of the reef itself. And then came the shrimps, tiny flashes of translucent pink that danced near the coral's base. They snapped their claws in sharp, rhythmic bursts, each sound crisp, but quickly swallowed by the sea. Click, click, click. a steady percussion beneath the coral's song. It was not noise, it was rhythm. The coral answered in kind, deepening its hum to cradle the sharper notes in warmth. Soon the entire reef had come alive. Every living thing, coral, fish, plant, and stone, had added its voice. It was a song not of perfection, but of belonging. No sound was too small, no rhythm out of place. Together they formed the true music of the ocean, steady, endless, full of calm and light. In the distance, a cluster of sponges exhaled bubbles in long, even streams. The bubbles rose in slow spirals, each one catching the golden light as it ascended. Their soft, airy sound added a breath-like quality to the choir, the ocean inhaling and exhaling in time with the morning. As the current carried the sound farther, it reached the outskirts of Bikini Bottom again, brushing the kelp gardens, the quiet rooftops, the open windows of SpongeBob's pineapple house. The hum passed through his walls, through his dreams, and into his heart, becoming the gentle rhythm that carried him deeper into rest. The coral continued to sing, not growing louder or faster, only fuller. The song had no climax, no direction, because peace doesn't rise, it spreads. Even the jellyfish drifting far above paused in their journey, their bells pulsing slower, their colors shifting to match the coral's golden tones. The entire sea, from the deepest trench to the shallowest tide pool, was breathing together now, one great, slow pulse of life. And through it all, the light kept growing. Each ray that touched the reef made it hum a little warmer, a little softer, until the sound was not something to hear, but something to feel. A vibration that lived in every drop of water, in every grain of sand, and in the quiet hearts of all who slept beneath the waves. The reef shimmered as though the ocean itself was smiling. Light touched everything, now faint at first, then slowly growing until it became a silver gold haze drifting through the water. The coral spires glowed softly from within, their shapes resembling ancient towers carved by time and patience. Each branch, each ridge seemed to hum with awareness. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried a feeling, something close to comfort. Small sea stars crawled lazily across the coral face. Their movements were slow, rhythmic, deliberate. Every motion pressed against the reef with gentle pressure, and even that somehow became part of the song. A low vibration pulsed through the stone, not words, not notes, but a kind of heartbeat, the steady breath of the reef's dreaming body. From the open blue, a school of fish approached. They were silver, nearly translucent, each one trailing a faint ribbon of light from its tail. They moved as one, not a single creature leading, but all of them responding to something invisible, something deeper than sound. As they entered the coral grove, their path curved gracefully between the towers, and their movement sent tiny waves of motion through the sand below. The coral answered with warmth, its hum growing softer, like a deep sigh of contentment. In the crevices between coral stones, plankton glowed faintly, tiny specks of green and blue suspended in stillness. Their light pulsed in time with the coral's song, like stars caught in the slow rhythm. The water seemed thicker here, as if sound and light had woven together, filling the space with invisible threads of calm. Far above, the current turned, bringing with it the scent of open sea, salt, driftwood, and the faint sweetness of kelp. It rolled across the reef like a gentle wind, lifting particles of sand and sending them swirling upward in lazy spirals. Each grain caught the light and flashed for a brief moment, before drifting down again, settling where it began. Even this motion, the rise and fall of the smallest pieces of earth, felt part of the coral's ancient. A pair of sea turtles glided through the far end of the reef. Their shells were covered in small flecks of coral dust, tiny living that had attached over time. They moved with the weightless grace of sleepwalkers, their flippers pushing through the water with slow, sure strokes. As they passed, their shadows stretched across the reef like long ribbons of dusk, and the coral glowed brighter in reply. The turtles drifted for a while, resting near a shelf where soft anemones bloomed, their eyes closed, their breathing steady, slow, deep, and certain. For a moment, the reef's song seemed to cradle them, like a lullaby too old to remember but too familiar to forget. Somewhere deeper, a current struck the edge of a hollow coral tube. It produced a low, resonant tone, a sound that trembled through the entire reef, vibrating softly in every living thing. The sound grew, changed, multiplied, echoes bouncing between coral pillars, reverberating through shells and sea plants, until the ocean floor itself seemed to be singing. There was no beginning to the music and no end. It flowed like the tide, rising and falling in gentle arcs, never rushing, never pausing completely. It was the same melody that had lived here for centuries, perhaps the same that whispered through every reef and every ocean. And though the coral did not think, it remembered. It remembered light, warmth, touch, and time. It remembered every creature that had ever swum past, every wave that had shaped its bones, every moon that had shone upon it. And through that memory, the reef continued to sing, not to call, not to speak, but simply to exist beautifully. Near one of the coral arches, a young sea sponge released a cloud of spores. They drifted upward like fine dust in sunlight, carried by the soft rise of the current. Each tiny particle shimmered for a moment, then vanished into the open sea, new beginnings hidden within the stillness. The coral's hum deepened again. It was as if it had welcomed the new life, folding the moment into its quiet celebration of the sea. The song rippled outward, past the coral's edge, past the sleeping turtles, past the slow-turning schools of fish. It reached into the open blue, and beyond that, into the dreams of every creature resting nearby. Even those who could not hear it, the starfish, the hermit crabs, the silent shells, felt its rhythm. The vibration passed through them gently, like a pulse of light through clear water. Nothing moved fast here. Nothing needed to. The world beneath the waves had learned long ago that peace lives in patience. So the coral continued its song, soft, low, endless, a living harmony that carried through the ocean like the memory of a dream. The longer it did, the more the water seemed to forget where one sound ended and another began. Every note folded into the next, every vibration layered softly until the sea became one continuous breath. It was no longer just the coral reef singing. It was the whole ocean, one vast voice murmuring in its sleep. Tiny fish lingered in the stillness, their eyes half closed, their fins stirring the faintest trails of motion. They were not awake, not truly asleep, just drifting in the music, caught between the pulse of the coral and the sway of the current. Above, the light had deepened to a soft golden haze. The sun, far away on the surface, was now high above the waves, its glow dimmed by layers of water, turned into long trembling shafts that shimmered like ribbons. These beams pierced the reef at slanted angles, illuminating certain coral towers one by one, as though the sea were quietly lighting candles for itself. And as each tower brightened, its hum joined the others in new harmony, a slightly higher tone here, a slower, richer one there, until the coral's song became something larger than melody. It became a feeling, something you could almost touch if you were still enough. A pair of seahorses glided through a coral archway, like vine, moved together perfectly balanced, each motion mirrored by the other. When they passed through the light, their small fins shimmered like stained glass, and the water around them seemed to pause to watch. They lingered for a moment, and then drifted upward, their bodies tracing slow spirals toward the shallower blue. When they left, the coral hummed a little softer, as though whispering goodbye. A current turned somewhere deeper, and the song carried farther once more. It wound its way beyond the coral towers, through canyons of smooth stone, over the sandy floor, and out toward the gentle slopes that led to Bikini Bottom. The sound was faint now, a low, rolling vibration that could be mistaken for the pulse of the ocean itself. But it kept moving, steady and patient, until it brushed against the kelp forest near SpongeBob's neighborhood. The long blades of kelp swayed gently in time with the unseen rhythm. Their motion created a whisper, soft, slow, endless, like 100 silk ribbons fluttering in deep water. The song of the coral had reached them, and they too had joined. Tiny fish darted among the kelp leaves, their scales flashing briefly in the faint light. Each turn, each flick, sent a tiny ripple through the water, a subtle percussion to the coral's distant melody. By the time the sound reached SpongeBob's pineapple home, it was barely there. It was no longer something to hear, but something to feel. A quiet rhythm, as steady as a heartbeat, vibrating through the walls, through the sand, through everything. Inside, SpongeBob stirred softly in his sleep. His blanket rose and fell with his breathing. Gary was curled nearby, his shell glowing faintly under the filtered light. The pineapple's walls creaked in gentle rhythm, each sound folding perfectly into the coral's faraway hum. If SpongeBob had been awake, he might have thought it was the ocean singing to him. But even asleep, he could sense it, the warmth, the balance, the peace of it. In his dream, he floated weightless, drifting through fields of coral that shimmered in every color of light. The towers bent softly as he passed, their edges brushing against his arms like silk. He smiled in his sleep. The coral's song had reached him completely now, not as sound, but as a calm that lived inside his heart. And just like that, his dreams became part of the sea's music too. Outside, the reef's glow began to dim. It wasn't fading, only softening, the way the horizon fades at dusk, or how light lingers on water before slipping into night. The coral continued to breathe, to hum, to remember. Its song remained steady, unbroken by time, unshaken by change. Every creature that had joined in the snails, the rays, the fish, the turtles, now rested again, each one wrapped in the slow pulse of the reef's rhythm. The current grew gentler, the bubbles fewer. The ocean had found its stillness once more. And in that stillness, the coral's hum echoed through the quiet, a promise perhaps, or a memory that the sea never truly forgets. It was the sound of everything alive, moving together, breathing as one. Not a song with a beginning, nor one that ever ends. Just the ocean, dreaming of itself, singing softly to anyone who drifts close enough to listen. And somewhere far above, the moon waited for night to return, ready to light the coral's towers again, so the choir could begin its song anew. Far beneath the glow of the coral gardens, the sea descends into quiet. It falls away in slow, dark layers, each one colder, stiller, quieter than the last. The light fades until it becomes little more than memory, a faint shimmer that drifts down like dust, growing weaker with every heartbeat. This is rock bottom, the place where sound slows to a crawl, where silence moves like a living thing. The water here is heavier, filled with shadows that drift like smoke. The ground is uneven, made of jagged stone and soft sand that breathes with the tide. Every few feet, a faint flicker of light blinks from the cracks, bioluminescent moss pulsing in patient rhythm. It's not bright enough to see by, only enough to remind the sea that there is still life here. A current moves through, slow and steady, like an enormous sigh echoing across the trench. It passes through the reef's hollow arches, and the sound it makes is unlike anything above. Not song, not hum, but a deep vibration that you feel more than hear. The silence here is not empty. It is full, thick with history and with old dreams, with the soft residue of time. In the distance, faint lights glimmer. They rise and fade, marking the slow rhythm of the sleeping reef. These are the silent corals, old, massive structures that have forgotten how to sing. Their colors are muted, their shapes strange and ancient, grown heavy with the weight of the deep. And yet, even without sound, they are alive. Their polyps open and close with the current's breath. Their branches curl slightly when the cold touches them. Each small motion releases a whisper of light, a glow that rolls down the coral's body like moonlight through fog. Tiny creatures wander between the coral bases. Translucent worms, clear shrimp, blind fish with soft white scales. They move slowly, always feeling, never rushing. They live in a world without day or night, a place where time drifts like silt, and everything learns to listen to nothing. One such fish glides past a broken coral spire. Its fins make no sound, only a faint vibration as they push through the water. It pauses for a moment beside the coral's edge, resting near a small cave that glows faintly from within. Inside the cave, a colony of glowing plankton flickers like stars. The fish blinks once, and for a second, the reflection of that light dances in its sightless eyes. Then it drifts on. The deeper you go into rock bottom, the less the ocean feels like a place, and the more it feels like thought. Everything slows. Even bubbles seem reluctant to rise. They float upward in slow motion, turning and stretching like dreams trying to leave the deep. The ground below slopes downward into a vast plain of pale sand. It looks like snow beneath the dim green light of the moss. Tiny cracks run through it like veins, and when the current moves, they release small streams of air that rise in soft spirals. Each stream makes a sound, a long, low the ocean's own voice, half forgotten but still there. On one of the distant ridges, a strange formation stands alone, a half-buried coral, its edges worn smooth by centuries of pressure. It's called the Silent Spire. No one remembers how it came to be here, but it's said that the coral above once sang down to it, that the Silent Spire is the last echo of that old connection. Now it stands quietly, its surface covered in glowing lichen, and slow-growing shells. When the current hits it just right, it hums faintly, a tone so low it could be mistaken for imagination. It's the kind of sound you don't notice at first, but then you feel it in your chest, as though the sea itself is whispering to your bones. The creatures here seem to understand it. They pause when it happens. Even the drifting worms stop mid-motion, and the plankton flicker in unison for a breathless moment. Then when the hum fades, they move again, slow and graceful, as if nothing had changed. But something always does. The hum leaves behind a kind of warmth, not heat, but comfort, like the memory of sunlight long forgotten. This is how rock bottom breathes, not in sound or color, but in presence. Each vibration is a heartbeat, each shimmer of moss, a blink of an ancient eye. And in that steady pulse of silence, the deep ocean dreams, not of noise, not of movement, but of stillness so perfect. It feels like peace. The deeper the current wandered through rock bottom, the slower everything became. Even the smallest sound stretched into distance, a faint vibration that lingered, like the echo of a thought that refused to fade. The sea here had no hurry. It had learned the art of waiting. Tiny organisms floated by, their bodies transparent and soft, their movement more drift than swim. Each one carried its own light, a pale blue shimmer that pulsed in time with the water's rhythm. Together they made the darkness glitter, like stars seen through fog. One creature, long and thin, almost ribbon-like, wove through the drifting plankton. Its body bent gently, its tail curling like smoke. Every few seconds, it opened its mouth to release a soft stream of glowing bubbles. The bubbles rose in a slow spiral toward the ceiling of the reef, leaving behind a faint trail of silver dust. It was quiet, but not empty. Rock bottom was full of breath. The coral here did not sing like the reefs above, but it remembered those songs. Sometimes, when the current turned, it made a sound, not music exactly, but a low murmur that drifted through the hollow stones. The vibration moved gently, so soft it could pass through a shell without breaking it. And when it did, the shell itself would answer, a faint tone, fragile as glass. The result was not melody, but resonance. The deep ocean spoke in resonance. Every motion had an echo. Every echo had its answer. Farther down the slope, a wide plain of smooth rock opened up. It stretched out like a sleeping animal, its curves worn soft by the current. Here and there, thin streams of bubbles rose from hidden vents, curling upward like incense smoke. Each one left behind a glimmering trail that caught what little light there was. The moss along the rocks pulsed faintly. Its glow was not constant. It flickered, as though breathing in the rhythm of something enormous and unseen. When one patch dimmed, another brightened, so that the seafloor always seemed to shift in slow waves of light. A cluster of jellyfish appeared near the ridge. They were smaller than those above, but their bells glowed with soft internal fire. Amber, violet, and deep blue. They moved together in silence, their bodies rising and falling in perfect time. Each pulse sent a ripple through the still water, each ripple a faint whisper of movement. As they drifted past the silent spire, their light brushed its surface, and for a brief moment, the stone glowed in reply. The coral's ancient texture caught the colors, reflecting them faintly like a distant memory of dawn. The jellyfish lingered near the spire, their movement slower now. They hovered just above its edge, their tentacles brushing against the faintly glowing moss. It was almost as though they were listening. Perhaps they could sense the old vibration, the hidden hum still trapped in the coral's heart. A single, soft current passed through, and one by one the jellyfish pulsed again, their lights brightening in a gentle wave. Then they drifted upward, disappearing into the darkness above, leaving the spire behind, quiet once more. The silence that followed was deeper than before. It pressed against the rocks, against the hollow coral, against the creatures that hid within it. It was not oppressive, it was comforting, like the pause after a long sigh. In that silence, you could almost imagine the sound of the world above, the coral garden still glowing, the waves rolling softly against the surface, the faint laughter of something distant and bright. But here, those sounds were ghosts, echoes of a life too far away to touch. And yet, even so far from light, there was peace. The reef did not need the sun to exist. It had learned the warmth of its own glow, the rhythm of its own stillness. Everything here lived by memory, the coral by the old songs, the fish by inherited calm, by the pull of ancient tides. This was the ocean's quiet heart, and it beat so slowly that even time seemed to hold its breath. From somewhere beyond the ridge, a new sound began to rise, a low, trembling vibration that seemed to come from the stone itself. It was not a voice, I said, but it felt like one. A note too deep to be heard, too gentle to disturb the water. The silent reef was speaking again, not to call or warn, but simply to remind the sea that it was still alive. The low vibration continued, stretching through the water like a line of sound too old to end. It trembled softly through the coral and into the stone, moving with the patience of something eternal. Every rock, every shell, every drifting grain of sand seemed to catch it. They did not resist, they listened. And as they listened, the reef seemed to breathe again. Faint patterns of light stirred along the coral walls, pulses of soft blue that spread outward in quiet rhythm. Each glow passed to the next, like a whispered message between friends who had not spoken in centuries. The current began to move with the light, not rushing, never rushing, but turning, circling, carrying the pulse of the reef in slow motion through the trenches. In that movement, a strange kind of song began to form. It was not made of notes, but of motion, the way sand lifted, the way moss dimmed and brightened, the way water curved around the stone. Somewhere above, where the ocean grew lighter, those motions brushed against the base of another reef, the coral gardens that lay between rock bottom and the open sea. And though the sound could not truly reach so far, something of its feeling did. A quiet ripple passed upward. It moved past the sleeping jellyfish, past the schools of drifting plankton, past the strange, still fish that hung half asleep in the current. Higher still, it brushed against the sea floor where the last fragments of light filtered down from Bikini Bottom. There, near a lonely rock covered in pale seaweed, a small seashell shivered. It was a simple spiral shell, nothing special, but once, long ago, it had grown in the very coral of rock bottom's rim. Now it rested far above, carried here by time and tide. When the deep vibration touched it, the shell resonated faintly. It released a soft hum, barely audible, a thread of sound so thin it could have been mistaken for silence. That hum drifted upward still, through layers of shadow and light, until it brushed the edge of a dreaming world. Far above, in the sleeping town of Bikini Bottom, the night had settled deep. The moonlight filtered through the sea in silver streaks, gliding across rooftops, curling through windows. It slipped over the Krusty Krab still sign, through Sandy's dome, and finally down to a certain quiet pineapple. Inside, SpongeBob slept soundly, his breathing slow and even. The hum from below found him, the way dreams find us, and not through sound, but through feeling. A faint warmth touched his imagination, and the stillness of rock bottom echoed softly through his dream. In that dream he floated, not swimming, not walking, simply floating, through a dark, peaceful ocean. There was no fear in the deep, only calm. Only the slow, endless rhythm of the sea remembering itself. The current carried him gently, and he could see far below tiny lights moving like stars in the dark. They pulsed in harmony, and though he did not understand, he felt at home. Back in rock bottom, the reef continued its patient murmuring. Every stone that had lain still for centuries now glowed faintly, their edges breathing with pale color. The spires hummed deepened, richer now, less lonely. And then, as if responding, the distant shells along the reef began to join. Their hollow bodies amplified the tone, turning it into a slow vibration that filled the trench. No words, no melody, just resonance. Above them, the current caught the vibration and carried it in wide, soft arcs through the valley. Each pass spread it farther. Each turn wrapped it around the reef like a lullaby sung to itself. Even the smallest creatures felt it. Tiny shrimp tucked themselves deeper into cracks, feeling the pulse beneath their shells. A pair of sleeping snails curled tighter, their spirals glowing faintly with the rhythm. And near the edge of the trench, a shadow stirred. Not a predator, not a monster, but a great, slow fish whose eyes had long since stopped reflecting light. It drifted close to the coral spire and paused, its mouth opening slightly as if to listen. The hum flowed through it, and for a heartbeat, its scales flickered with blue. It did not stay long. It moved on, slow as a drifting stone, but even after it left, a trail of faint glow lingered in its wake. The reef was awake now, not in noise or motion, but in harmony. Every living thing, every silent shell was part of the same breath. And though rock bottom remained as dark as ever, it did not feel empty. The silence was not the absence of sound, but the fullness of stillness, a deep, ancient peace that spread through the sea like warmth. The vibration continued, softly, endlessly, becoming indistinguishable from the current itself. The silent reef was not truly silent anymore. It was simply complete. The vibration lingered, a soft pulse that spread through the water like a final heartbeat. It was no longer a sound, but a sensation, a slow wave of calm that pressed against every surface, that touched every quiet creature hiding in the stone. The its last fight. Now it began to fall still again. The coral lights dimmed in careful rhythm, like candles being gently blown out one by one. Each glow receded into its shell, into its root, into the dark that had always been its home. Above, the current softened. It no longer circled. It drifted. The particles suspended in the water floated like slow snow, turning in the pale light that still flickered from the coral spire. The spire itself gave one last shimmer, a faint, silvery breath that climbed its narrow body and slipped upward into the open water. The light dissolved as it rose, fading into shadow long before it could reach the upper sea. But for that small moment, rock bottom glowed like the ghost of a memory, a dream the ocean had once dreamed long ago. Tiny creatures moved again, testing the water, their delicate fins catching the last traces of the current. A few strands of seaweed turned, their edges swaying softly, like someone half awake and turning over in their sleep. The great slow fish that had listened earlier was now gone, vanished into the deeper dark beyond the ridge. But the faint glow it carried in its scales still lingered along the walls, like distant starlight reflecting off old glass. Gradually, even that light dimmed. Silence returned, layer by layer. The reef, the coral, the stones, each seemed to exhale and then hold their breath again. Above, in the far distance, where faint light began to touch the edge of the deep, the hum that had drifted upward began to fade. The connection between worlds loosened, like a thread unspooling gently into still water. Yet something of it remained. It had brushed SpongeBob's dream, and the dream held onto it. Inside the sleeping pineapple, SpongeBob stirred slightly, not awake, not restless, just shifting deeper into sleep. The hum had softened into a melody now, one that existed only in his imagination. He floated again in the endless blue, but this time there was light, small lights rising from below like tiny moons. He reached out to touch one, and when his hand passed through, it turned into a swirl of glowing bubbles that danced away through the currents. The water around him hummed with quiet comfort. It wasn't words, but it felt like someone whispering a lullaby. Rest, the ocean seemed to say. Even the deepest dark is part of the sea's breath. The words folded into the rhythm of his dreaming heart. He smiled in his sleep, his body sinking a little deeper into the pillow, as if the weight of the ocean itself was cradling him. Back in rock bottom, the reef's last glow faded completely. Now only the faintest specks of bioluminescent dust remained, floating like slow fireflies through the trenches. The coral spire cooled, its surface now pale and smooth again, its hum hidden beneath centuries of quiet. But though the reef appeared asleep, a secret still lingered deep inside. In the hollow heart of the spire, a chamber so small it could hold no more than a bubble, a light flickered once. Then it was faint, like the pulse of a newborn star. It didn't rise or fall, it simply existed, a quiet ember in the endless dark. Perhaps it was memory. Perhaps it was the reef's heart, a remnant of every song it had ever hummed the current, every vibration it had ever sent through the deep. And though no one could see it, that small light continued to glow patiently, eternally, waiting for another tide, another hum, another moment of awakening. Outside, the water was utterly still. The trench lay silent beneath the weight of night. Even the drifting plankton seemed to rest, their lights dimmed to the faintest breath of color. Above all of it, the ocean stretched vast and calm. It wrapped rock bottom like a blanket, pressing gently, holding its silence close. And in that silence, there was peace. The kind of peace only the deepest places could know, where sound turns to memory, where light turns to thought, where the sea dreams of itself. Somewhere above, the faintest change began. The moon was slipping past its highest point. Far-off currents shifted as the dawn tide began its slow return. The light from the surface would not reach rock bottom for hours, but still, the ocean was changing. It was the softest of transitions, the quiet promise of morning written in the motion of the sea. Down here in the silent reef, and nothing moved. And yet, everything was moving, in slow rhythms too vast to see. The coral, the shells, the moss, even the stone itself, all were part of the same deep breath. And as that breath stretched through the water, fading into stillness, the last echo of the reef's hum dissolved into quiet. Only one thing remained, a lingering warmth in the current, a whisper of calm that would drift through the sea for miles, soft enough to find its way back to dreams. The reef rested, the deep slept, and the ocean held its peace. The ocean was dreaming, not in waves or storms, but in soft rhythms that moved through everything, through coral and shell, through current and sand, through every sleeping creature that floated in its endless blue. Far above rock bottom, where the water began to grow pale again, the first faint shimmer of dawn touched the sea. It wasn't sunlight yet, just a slow, pearly glow filtering through the deep, like a thought taking shape after a long night's rest. The light drifted down through layers of quiet. Each layer changed it. Blue turned to violet, violet to silver, silver to the soft green that glows behind closed eyes. All across the seabed, the still things began to move, not wake, just stir. The corals sighed, their polyps extending and retracting like fingers flexing in sleep. Tiny bubbles gathered along the ridges, forming slow lines that rose upward in lazy spirals. In the far distance, the choral choir of the upper reefs began to hum again. Their tones were faint, almost invisible, more feeling than sound. They moved like silk through the water, curling around stone, threading through caverns, spilling gently across the slopes that led toward rock bottom. The hum reached the silent reef and still resting from its long night of resonance. The coral spire did not glow this time. It simply listened. And in that listening, something deep within it seemed to smile. The two sounds, the upper hum and the deep silence, met in the middle of the sea, where light and shadow joined hands. There they became one tone, one vibration that stretched outward in every direction. It wasn't music, but it carried harmony. It wasn't a voice, but it carried meaning. The ocean was remembering itself. Tiny fish began to drift from the sleeping reefs, their scales catching the first glimmers of rising light. They moved not to feed or flee, but simply to wander, drawn by the rhythm that pulsed through the water. Their movement stirred the sand, sending clouds of soft gold dust into the current. The dust shimmered like morning mist, curling and dissolving as it rose. Above, a lone jellyfish glided through the last stretch of darkness. Its bell pulsed in steady, gentle time, a heartbeat for the sea. With every contraction, its body caught the dawn light, scattering it through the water in faint pink and blue rays. The rays brushed across an old coral arch, where small shells clung in delicate rows. Each shell resonated with the faint vibration of the sea, creating a whispering sound, the softest possible melody. It was a lullaby, but not for sleep. It was for waking, the kind that comes not from alarm, but from gentle invitation, the ocean's way of opening its eyes. In SpongeBob's pineapple house, that same vibration found him again. His dream had shifted. The deep, dark sea he had floated in was brighter now, its blue turned to soft gold. He could see the outlines of coral towers reaching upward, their tips glowing faintly as if welcoming the morning. He drifted closer, weightless and calm, his hands brushing through the current. Tiny air bubbles trailed from his fingertips, each one catching light and turning into a floating star. All around him, the ocean breathed slowly, evenly, in rhythm with his own chest. The tide of dreams and the tide of water had become one. Somewhere far above, a whale's song echoed faintly. It was deep and distant, a call stretched thin by miles of water. But even so, the tone carried comfort, the ancient voice of the sea itself, rising and falling in the steady pattern of peace. SpongeBob listened. He didn't try to understand it. He didn't need to. The sound felt like home, like something he'd always known but had forgotten to remember. The current carried him gently forward, through gardens of coral that shimmered like dawn caught in glass. He passed the sleeping jellyfish, the slow-turning seaweed, the glowing plankton, that traced patterns like constellations in the dark. The water here was neither night nor day. It was the space between them, a place where time paused, where the sea dreamed not of what was, but of what it could still become. And in that dream, everything was at peace. Every ripple, every shadow, every particle of drifting light, all part of the same infinite, breathing whole. The ocean, vast and calm, was dreaming of itself. SpongeBob drifted deeper into the dream. He didn't swim. The water itself seemed to carry him. As if the ocean had decided that he should see something important, something too quiet to be found when awake. Around him, the world had softened. Shapes blurred into color. Color melted into light. The coral towers shone faintly from within, their branches glowing like soft lanterns in the dark. Tiny streams of bubbles rose through the coral maze, gliding past SpongeBob like notes in an invisible song. He reached out and touched one. It burst against his palm without a sound, leaving behind a ripple that shimmered and disappeared. But for a moment, he could feel warmth, a pulse, a heartbeat, as if the bubble had carried a memory inside it. He looked up. Above him, the water rippled in wide, slow waves. The surface was far away, but even at this depth, the first light of dawn had begun to descend. It broke into long ribbons of gold that danced through the water, weaving across his face, catching the edges of his spongy outline. The water glowed like liquid sunlight. Each ribbon moved with purpose, curling and twisting as if searching for something. Not just light-seeking darkness, but a dream-seeking dream. The ribbons reached the coral below, and wherever they touched, the reef responded. The coral's inner light flared briefly, then settled into a deeper hue. Peach, rose, lilac, a soft, living sunrise blooming from within the sea. SpongeBob smiled. It felt like the entire ocean was waking up beside him. He floated past a garden of sea anemones. Their tentacles swayed slowly, opening and closing like petals testing the air after a long night. Tiny fish darted between them, half awake, their movements gentle, their scales catching the dawn like flecks of fire. Somewhere beyond the reef, the coral choir began again, not the haunting hum of the night, but something brighter, softer, like a sigh turning into a smile. It moved through the current in waves, a slow and endless harmony. Each note brushed against SpongeBob's dream, and he could feel it, not with his ears, but in his chest, a low vibration that spread warmth through him. It felt like kindness. It felt like love. The kind that doesn't ask, doesn't need to be explained. The quiet, ever-present love the ocean had for all things within it. He floated onward. In the distance, he saw a wide clearing, a vast, open plain of sand and light. Above it, the water shimmered with color, as though all the dawns that had ever risen were gathering there at once. He drifted closer. The current wrapped around him like a soft blanket, guiding him without sound. Every movement he made left behind a trail of tiny bubbles that glowed and faded like footprints on water. At the center of the plain stood something unexpected, a single, tall coral spire. It looked ancient, its edges worn smooth by centuries of tides. He recognized it instantly. It was the spire from rock bottom. But here in the dreaming ocean, it was transformed. No longer gray and silent, it shimmered with life. Streams of color flowed through its veins, pulses of light moving upward like breath. It hummed quietly, a sound low and steady, the same note he had felt in his dreams all night long. SpongeBob floated closer, his reflection glimmering across its surface. The hum deepened, and the water around him seemed to still. The ocean itself was listening. He placed his hand on the coral. It was warm. Not the warmth of sunlight, but the warmth of something alive, something aware. And as soon as he touched it, the world changed. The coral's glow expanded, spilling outward in a slow spiral of color. The light moved through the water in waves, carrying images with it, not memories, but feelings, the calm of the moonlit current, the soft rhythm of his gentle drift, the harmony of the coral choir, the peace of the silent reef. All of it flowed together now and blending into one vast, wordless understanding. It was the ocean's dream, the story of its own breathing, its own endless cycle of rest and renewal. SpongeBob's heart filled with quiet wonder. He didn't need to speak. He didn't even think. He simply was, a part of the ocean's dream, and the ocean a part of his. Around him, the current grew brighter. The hum of the coral deepened, stretching into the kind of silence that isn't empty, the kind that holds everything at once. And in that silence, the ocean sighed, a single, gentle exhale that seemed to flow through every corner of the sea. The dreaming ocean was fully awake. The hum deepened. It rolled through the coral like thunder slowed down to a whisper, a vast vibration that touched every grain of sand for miles. SpongeBob floated still, his hand resting on the warm spire. The light beneath his palm pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, as if the coral were breathing alongside him. And then very slowly, the spire began to open. It did not break or crumble. Its surface unfolded like the petals of a giant flower, revealing a core of pure liquid light. The glow wasn't blinding, it was soft, like dawn seen through water, gold and pale blue, shifting and swirling as though alive. SpongeBob drifted closer, and for a moment, he saw things within it, images moving like reflections in glass. A field of glowing jellyfish pulsing in perfect time. The silent trench, now breathing again. Coral towers shimmering like city lights in the distance. The faint outline of the crusty crab, bathed in the calm blue of early morning. All of it was part of the same dream, threads woven into one enormous tapestry of sea and sleep. The coral's light rose, spilling upward in slow spirals that reached far above. They drifted higher, past the reef or past the great currents, all the way to the surface, where the first rays of real sunlight were beginning to break through. The two lights met, one from the sky, one from the deep, and for a single heartbeat, The ocean glowed from top to bottom. Every drop of water, every speck of sand, every hidden creature, all bathed in the same gentle warmth. It was as if the sea itself had exhaled, releasing all the dreams it had been keeping. SpongeBob felt it pass through him, a deep calm that traveled from the tips of his fingers to the quiet corners of his mind. He could feel the heartbeat of the ocean, slow and steady, echoing with his own. It wasn't a sound anymore. It was a feeling, a sense of belonging so complete that nothing else existed outside it. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the coral had begun to fold back into itself. The light dimmed, the hum softened, and the spire returned to stillness. But the glow didn't vanish. It lingered in the water, moving gently with the current, spreading outward like a sigh that would never end. SpongeBob looked around. The ocean was full of light now, and it wasn't bright, nor it was alive. Every coral, every plant, every shell seemed to shimmer faintly, as if remembering the dream it had just lived. He floated upward slowly. The water above him sparkled like liquid gold. Small bubbles drifted past, each one reflecting tiny fragments of his dream, a jellyfish's glow, a coral's hum, a field of slow-turning anemones. As he rose, the current carried him through layers of gentle sound, whispers, sighs, songs without words. They weren't calling to him. They were simply being, letting their voices melt into the vast, endless quiet. He passed through a patch of open sea, and for a moment he saw the entire world below him, the glowing reef of rock bottom, the coral gardens of the middle sea, the drifting jellyfish plains, and far in the distance, the faint outline of Bikini Bottom beginning to wake. The dream was dissolving into morning. He could feel it now, a change in the current, a gentle tug that pulled him upward. He followed it without thought, his body light as a drifting leaf. All around him, the water shimmered with the last remnants of the dream. They moved through the sea like memory, small, flickering trails of color that rose toward the surface. The coral's hum faded behind him, but his rhythm stayed in his chest. It was the rhythm of breathing, of tides, of time itself turning gently forward. At last, SpongeBob broke through the final layer of deep water. The light here was golden and wide, stretching in ribbons that waved across the sand below. The sea above Bikini Bottom glowed with the soft brightness of morning. He hovered there for a while, half in dream, half awake. He could see faintly the outline of his pineapple home far below, and bubbles rising from his chimney like tiny clouds. He smiled, not because of anything he understood, but because everything felt right, as if the ocean had told him something that didn't need words to be remembered. The dreaming ocean was growing quiet again. Its hum softened into a breeze. Its glow faded into blue. And all that remained was calm. The ocean exhaled. A long, slow sigh moved through the currents, soft as silk and cool as a whisper. The world beneath the waves was still, bathed in a pale golden light that filtered down from above. SpongeBob drifted near the surface, suspended between waking and sleeping, where everything seemed both real and imagined. The water around him shimmered with slow-moving shapes, soft swirls of sand, drifting kelp, tiny silvery fish turning together like living ribbons. He blinked slowly, watching the light ripple across his hands. It felt strange to be here, so high, so quiet, after everything he'd seen below, but nothing about it felt lonely. It was as though the whole was breathing with him. He could feel deep in his chest. Somewhere in the distance, the faint call of a whale echoed, a low, resonant note that hung in the water like a bell. It drifted toward him, folding itself into the rhythm of the sea. The sound wasn't sad or happy. It was complete. He closed his eyes again, and in the soft darkness behind his eyelids, he could still see the ocean's dream, the glowing coral, the slow heartbeat of the deep, the whispering reefs of rock bottom, and the shimmering towers of the coral choir. Each image moved like a reflection across the surface of his thoughts. They weren't fading away, they were settling, like sand falling gently back to the seafloor. He let them drift, let them rest, let them become part of the water around him. Below, the currents were changing, turning warmer, brighter, as if the sea itself was waking up. The hum that had filled the deep was gone now, but in its place came something new, a faint, rhythmic sound of gentle waves brushing coral. A morning song, simple and endless. A school of small jellyfish drifted past, their bells glowing faint pink in the light. They pulsed in unison, their movements slow and hypnotic. For a moment, SpongeBob reached out his hand, and one brushed lightly against his palm, its touch soft as sleep. He smiled. The jellyfish floated upward and away, joining hundreds more that shimmered toward the sunlit surface. Their glow mingled with the sunlight, turning the water into a field of quiet fireflies. Beneath them, the coral reefs glowed faintly. The light that had filled the ocean's dream had not disappeared. It had simply softened, nestled deep within every shell and rock, a quiet reminder of the night's long, peaceful song. SpongeBob turned, slowly letting himself drift downward again, following the familiar pull of home. The world passed by in glimmers, fish stirring from their resting places, currents reshaping the sand, bubbles rising from the cracks of old rocks. The ocean was moving again, but softly, gently, as though it too had just woken from a deep dream. He passed through a field of seagrass that swayed with the tide. The blades brushed against him, whispering faintly like sleepy voices. Each movement seemed to say, "We are still here. We are still breathing. We are still dreaming, even while awake." The thought filled him with a quiet warmth. When he finally reached the familiar curve of Bikini Bottom, everything was wrapped in soft light. The houses glowed faintly, the sand shimmered with morning blue, and bubbles rose lazily from chimneys and vents. The world had not changed. It was still the same sea he had always known, but he felt it differently now. Every ripple carried meaning. Every sound carried memory. Even the silence between the waves felt alive. He floated down to his pineapple house, settling by the window where his reflection waited, the same sleepy smile, the same wide eyes half dreaming. His bed was still rumpled, his blanket rising and falling with the faint hum of the sea. He slipped inside quietly, as if returning to the softest corner of the ocean itself. The moment he rested his head, the world outside seemed to pause. Bubbles drifted by the window and catching the early light. Each one shone for a heartbeat, then faded, leaving only calm. SpongeBob's eyelids grew heavy again. The sound of the sea, gentle, constant, endless, filled his thoughts. He didn't need to dream anymore. The ocean was dreaming for him now. The currents turned once, twice, then settled. Everything was still. Above the reef, the sun's rays slipped deeper, illuminating the quiet seafloor in threads of gold. The jellyfish drifted like stars. The coral shimmered faintly, their song now only a memory echoing in the water. And for one final infinite moment, the ocean itself seemed to hum, a soft lullaby meant for anyone still awake, a promise whispered in the language of waves. Rest now. The sea is watching. All is calm. All is well. Then silence, the most peaceful kind, spreading outward through every current, every reef, every dream beneath the surface. The ocean slept, and so did he.